Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Paradigm Shifts podcast with your host, Keisha Kruger. I'm an organization development practitioner and executive coach, working with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. My personal mission? Share science-based tools and leadership insights from the field that you can use in the workplace and beyond. Considering we spend about 3/4 of our lifetime at work, there is incredible science and organizational psychology that can be used to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. Join me as I speak with thought leaders and business leaders in practice, unpacking lightbulb moments for paradigm shifts. Hello, everyone. On this week's episode, we chat with Dr. Mike Watson, who is a leadership professional and an expert on leadership. And we chat all about his heart-centric philosophy to leadership, the impact of his dissertation research, and so much more. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Do yourself a favor and click it right now. We've got some incredible guests coming on that you won't want to miss. Mike currently holds multiple positions at the University of South Carolina, including Department of Retailing Undergraduate Coordinator, Instructor, Store Director, and Senior Faculty Fellows for the Center for Integrative and Experiential Learning. He was recently featured in and contributed to a leadership book called The Henka Effect. For more information on Mike and to follow along on his journey, check out the show notes. Hello, Mike. How are you?
Hey, I am well. Thanks for doing this.
No, thank you for being here. This is going to be an exciting chat. We've got a lot to talk about when it comes to leadership, but more in particular, heart-centered leadership. And I know you've done a lot of research around this topic. So can you share with us, how did you get started? What got you started? Talk to me about your journey.
Yeah, right. Everybody has a journey, right? There's always the story
Yeah.
behind the story kind of thing that goes on. And so, you know, early on, right out of my undergraduate studies, I went right into the industry, the retail industry, where I quickly rose through promotions and work into corporate leadership positions. And so, although personally that was amazing, Um, honestly, looking back, I was not prepared. So
Mm.
everything that I was being awarded and honored and recognized for was individual performance. And as we know, individual performance does not translate well into leadership. So, because you're dealing with a
Yeah.
diverse group of individuals that are counting on your ability to construct a vision or to propose a strategy in which they can understand. And if the only resource you had was what you've done, well, then you're going to fail at being a leader. So that
Mm.
transition from individual performer to leader was a difficult one in which failure often defined how I understood what I needed to do. And so overall, my career was, positive. However, I really could have lessened the gap between what I knew and what I did if I would have had some insight into how to be a leader. So when I switched over into academia and started teaching higher education, that love of leadership and that desire to see, like, well, how can I impact others so that young emerging leaders, when they get into the industry, don't have that same chasm, that gap that they have to cross that I did. And therefore, how
Mm.
can we then translate that into positive performance for an organization? So that's how I got into it.
Yeah. So I love that you share that it took an opportunity of your words failure to be able to make that pivot, right?
Absolutely. And, early on, at least for me, failure was not something I was looking for as a means of understanding. it was,
Yeah.
it was socially unacceptable. It was not something that was ever put forth to me from a cultural standpoint and how I grew up as a means of learning. So it
Mm.
was always based on just providing the right answers at the right time and persisting through any difficulties to achieve a goal. Um, the ability to step back and to self reflect on what could have been or what could have been done differently and or how you might perceive it was never something that was mentioned, and it was never taught within a corporate structure.
Mm-mm.
That was always performance based, and it was always quantifiable, and it was always something that had to be measurable. And so everything was based on, you know, data, as opposed to looking at the individual and how they could actually influence the data by influencing the people.
Mm. So, what did it take for you to turn inwards?
Yeah. So what it took was years of repeating the same mistakes,
Mm.
of thinking
Mhm.
that changing the environment or the location and or the individual that I worked with was going to somehow change the outcome, which was never going to happen because I didn't change. So it might look different, but the results continue to be the same. So although positive, like nothing, it was nothing dramatic. I didn't get fired or anything, but there was just this constant barrier that I would run into. And it was the same issues that I would encounter about my own personal development and growth and my own performance, and thus my people's performance, that I kept trying to figure out, well, why is this not working? I'm doing the things
Mhm.
that I did previously as an individual that were highly successful. Why is this not translating into group organizational success? And so it wasn't until doing that like 3 times at different levels that I said, I'm just going to take a moment and really look at myself. And so I just decided in the moment, after experiencing repeated failure, in terms of how I wanted to grow and how I wanted to grow a business, I said, well, maybe the real answer is that I look at who I am and what my
Mhm.
purpose is and what I need to do. And not uncommon, this was totally aligned with a lot of drama and a lot of chaos and upheaval in my personal life. So,
Mm.
so the two, right, were
Mhm.
strong enough. So the personal aspect of what I was experiencing in my life at that moment, and the continuous desire to understand my organizational performance better, those two things came together and they were strong enough collectively to finally move me into a place of self reflection and self awareness, where I decided, okay, let me look at myself. Let's stop looking at external forces to solve internal issues.
Mm. Say that again.
So, yeah, that
Mm.
was one of the insights,
Mm.
right? Is
Yeah.
to stop looking for external solutions or forces for internal issues. And
Mm.
so, that was a pivot for me, as you mentioned.
Yeah, this mindset shift, this paradigm shift, we'll just drop that.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
is it's so incredibly important for the work you're about to talk about, right? Because it's always the starting point, in my opinion, when you're trying to do change externally to start internally. Um, that mindset shift where you're noticing the pattern. You said the patterns that you noticed,
Hmm.
they weren't necessarily like bad things, but they were things that you realized were kind of hindering you from getting the growth that you were seeking. And you noticed it in your personal life because we don't have a home self, we don't have a work self, we have one human self.
Right.
And you recognize that there were certain patterns that you wanted to see a change in, and then you had the willingness to change. And so I think that's also important to notice as well, is that willingness and desire to change, that's not going to come from your external environment, that's only going to come internal. And so when you can shift your mindset to things are not happening to me, they're happening for me. And what influence can I have over my external environment? It requires me to look within. So powerful.
Yeah.
So, then how does that work that you've done on yourself relate to this construct or concept of heart centered leadership? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so I love everything you just said, and that was another big mantra of mine that I walked away with, is that life does not happen to me; it happens through me. And
Mm.
so when you shift that perspective, and it was those types of like insights, right? So I started to do a lot of research and a lot of reading, trying to get my hands on anything I could about internal development of the self and why that mattered. And then because I have such a passion and love for leadership and its ability to influence others, I put the two together. And so, you know, what I continue to find is that what we know and what we do are often in direct contrast. So,
Mm.
so we have plenty of research, and we can talk a little bit about it, but we have plenty of research that shows and documents that the more self-aware you are, the more organizationally aware you become.
Oof.
And that people respond most positively to leaders that are self-aware, authentic, empathetic, vulnerable, transparent, all these skills and characteristics that we can talk about. There's no shortage of data that shows that engagement goes up, performance goes up, trust goes up. And yet, what we continue to elevate and highlight in leadership is command and control, hierarchy
Mm.
based, authoritative power. And we've framed it this way because of a Western viewpoint of how courage and power combined together happen to mean action and doing, and leave out the whole half of the equation of being. So we're not being leaders, we're just doing leadership. And so
Mm.
that can only get you so far. And it is why engagement, and Gallup research shows this every year, it is why engagement never plateaus above 25-35%. So employees are consistently disengaged, actively over 50%. And so if over 50% of your workforce is not actively engaged, there's no amount of power, authority, title that's going to shift that. The only thing that
Mm.
will move people is heart-centered communication and connection, where people can finally trust you so that what you say has more meaning, so that they understand that what you do proves what you believe.
Mm. There's so much goodness in
Sorry.
all of what you just said. I just need to like pause and process, because this is the first time on this podcast that I've ever talked about kind of, it feels like a spiritual intelligence, right? A spiritual component of leadership, or let's call it a conscious type of leadership,
Sure.
where the individual is really showing up as their vulnerable, authentic self. And we talked about vulnerability in my podcast before, but this is something bigger. And I know that you touched a little bit on the characteristics of traits of a heart-centered leader. Um, let's go into that a little bit, and then also share with me a little bit more about how companies benefit from this type of
Yeah,
leadership.
absolutely. I think it's imperative, based on my research I did for my dissertation when I was doing my doctoral research, to understand that this philosophy that I'm forming of heart-centered leadership is something that came from what I dug deep into in my research, which was spiritual intelligence, which you mentioned. And that's
Mm.
Reader's Digest version, kind of small definition here. Spiritual intelligence is not related to religion. I want to make that clear right up front. It is not tied to or defined by any kind of religion or religious activity. It's the idea that spiritual intelligence is a higher level of intelligence, um,
Mm.
where the primary role is to find meaning in one's life so that you can solve complex problems through questioning. Thereby, you can create a structure in which both your IQ, your cognitive intelligence, and your emotional intelligence become much more effective. So it's a way to
Mm.
elevate other intelligences that we have already inherently within us.
So spiritual intelligence is kind of like that collective, synergistic, and compounded effect that happens when you kind of bring the IQ and the EQ together. Is that right?
Yes. And the way that I have found, clearly, this is my perspective and my viewpoint
Yeah.
based on research, the way I found
Yeah.
that is an effective way to do this is to listen to our heart. And so, hence,
Oh,
heart-centered
wow.
leadership. So if all we do is listen to our mind, we will never get there. And so we
Mm.
have to listen to both our heart and our mind. I believe fully that we need to reverse the communication that we do. So instead of top down, our mind tells our body what to do and how to act and how to behave. I believe that we should first go to our heart to inform our mind about what it is thinking, so that it becomes a filter through which it can make decisions, take actions, communicate vision, strategy. And if we would reverse that order, then it becomes much more clarified, authentic, and transparent. And it lets us stay more in line with our purpose. Because every
Mm.
leader at the end of the day should be serving a purpose greater than themselves.
That's the responsibility that comes with leadership, right? And when you say heart center, like reversing the order, starting with your heart, a lot of people are going to hear that and it's going to peak in whether it's a good or a bad response that they're going to get or reaction. It's not the first thing people think of, right? And when you think about leading with your mind first, it's generally what happens in business. And we get what I'm getting at is when we start with our minds aren't always right? Our thoughts aren't always factual, so they can deter us and take us out of alignment with what's really needed. And that's because our thoughts, they can be made up, right? Because they are coming from maybe coping mechanisms, survival mode, things like that.
Yep.
As we're seeking for safety, we're seeking for stability in our environments as we naturally do as humans, and we're scanning our environment. Sometimes we fill in what we don't know, the absence of information. And so those thoughts, those assumptions can lead us astray potentially. But when we're leading with our heart, how does that help in that situation? And also, what does it look like to lead with your heart?
Yeah. So thank you. The way that I think is most effective to listen to our heart, first of all, it's
Listen.
nothing
Hmm.
hyper mystical. It's
Hmm.
literally giving yourself the permission to be quiet and making time to self reflect and be self aware. So for me, heart centered leadership is grounded, it is founded on self awareness. Um, Self reflection and self awareness is that practice of qualifying our thoughts and our feelings and our actions through our heart in coherence with our mind so that we make effective choices. But if we never pause, if we never stop to be quiet and be introspective, to consider what have I done? Why am I doing it? Who am I that is doing this? These almost existential type questions that we often fail to ask from a Western society perspective, then we don't allow ourselves to gain the insight that is in our hearts, in our selves, to better inform our minds so that, to your point, we don't get led astray on a story we told ourselves.
Mm.
Because our stories and our minds are shaped by keeping us safe. It wants to keep us safe. And so it's going to provide us with data and information that fills in any gap of fear or rejection or what to do with the story we want to believe. But that doesn't necessarily
It's
mean it's the most informed insight. It is a
ego driven,
perspective.
right?
And so, if we meditate, if we take a walk in the woods, if we sit and listen to music, however you need to get quiet and be one with your thoughts, then you will automatically begin to understand who you are so that you have the presence to become who you should be.
For leaders that are listening to this who this is not part of their practice,
Mhm.
you mentioned a couple ways to do it, right? Meditate, listen to music, maybe walk in the woods. It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? How often should leaders be practicing the quiet, the stilling of the mind, listening to themselves and turning inwards in order for this to kind of really take an effect?
Yeah, so it has to be a consistent practice. And what I emphasize and what research shows again is that it's not the length of time that one does it, it's the consistency with which
Mm.
one does it. So it could be literally 30 seconds, but if you do it constantly, then you will see the benefits and you will gain the insights and the clarity around who you are and what you do and why you do it. And that will inform, obviously, how you are and how you, more importantly, how you be with others,
Mm.
right? And so oftentimes we get stuck on it has to be this programmatic thing where it's I have to do it an hour a day for this many days, otherwise it doesn't take effect, and that's hard for people. Um, it's a chaotic, ever-changing world that is, and if you're a leader, you're constantly being pressured from a variety of external and internal stakeholders, uh, social and personal influences. And so time is precious. And
Mm.
so if I came to you and said, well, you need to start meditating for an hour every day, it's not going to happen. Regardless of how many
Mhm.
facts I gave you and how much benefit I could show you, it's not going to happen because it doesn't fit within the context of who they are as a leader and what they understand. So, what I have
Mm.
found and what I tell others through consulting work and through writing is that in any moment between a conversation, as you're walking to your car, um, as you hang up the phone from a conversation, take 10 seconds, take 30 seconds, and just reflect on how you feel, what you're doing, and what was just transpired. And and again, it's not to judge, but just to get clarity. And it's not to say right or wrong, it's literally to clarify and make sure, okay, did that conversation, was that purposeful and intentional in the way that I have wanted this to be in terms of organizational mission and vision and strategy? Or did I allow a story or my emotions to overtake what I needed to do? Right.
Mm.
So for me, it's about consistency, not length.
Absolutely. Consistency builds the muscle, right? It becomes muscle memory and then it becomes just part of who you are, right? As a leader, as you're mentioning, I love the example of like 30 seconds in between you're walking from your car to your maybe to the workplace or from your home to your car and just asking what am I thinking, feeling and doing. It gives you a moment, a pause, ability to reflect. So if every leader in an organization was doing this, how would it benefit a company?
Well, before I give you the hard and facts on that, which it does, what I think
Mhm.
really happens is then all of a sudden you have leaders that are able to discern. So discernment becomes a part of their practice. And just real quick, if we look at the word discern and look at the Latin root of it, it just means to distinguish or sift or separate. And so when we are asking ourselves to mentally sift through this unending onslaught of information that we take in every day, if we don't pause to do it in a purposeful way, then it can feel exhausting and overwhelming and it can fatigue us. So, you know, what is rarely discussed is that discernment is that our heart also has the ability to communicate to our brain, and that with practice we can learn to intentionally control the dialogue and create that coherence between our mind and our body. So we know that research shows that if I'm stressed, right, if I do nothing to manage my stress of data overload,
Mhm.
that my heart rhythms become unbalanced and become not coherent. And
Yeah.
that directly impacts my ability to problem solve, to communicate with others, to understand and see opportunities because my body is in a stress mode. So
Oof.
if I practice internal reflection and self awareness consistently at 30-minute increments, 30-minute, 30-second increments, um, then you're constantly reminding your body and your heart that it's okay. And then, therefore, you're positioning yourself at a much higher level to make decisions and to perform. So,
Oof.
you know, specifically in terms of the benefits, there are so many, but I can name a few. Um, the bulk of my research focused on employee engagement. So, absolutely, spiritual intelligence, which was grounded on self awareness, directly is correlated with increasing employee engagement. And the main reason it helped with employee engagement was because leaders that practiced self awareness and that aspect of spiritual intelligence were seen as more trustworthy. And because people could trust them, they felt safe to be who they are at work, which meant they were more fully engaged in their work. It also means they took less sick days. It also means that they were more willing to collaborate with other departments. It also meant that they were more inclusive of others' opinions about what
Mm.
potentially could be solutions because they felt safe and they trusted the leadership that they've created a culture in which they could be their full selves, right? So if people feel safe in themselves and where they are, this increases the willingness to collaborate. It diminishes the silos that people operate in. It improves innovation. And all of that's going to hit your bottom line. If people are taking less days off, if people are willing to cross collaborate, if people are responding quicker to project requests because they feel safe to do so, then all of that's going to be more efficient. All of that's going to drive bottom line profitability.
Whew, so much there. Let's just break apart safety for a moment,
Sure.
right? Because the opposite of not having a safe environment, feeling safe in your environment when you're at the workplace, regardless where you are, what does that do to your immune system, to your, as you've mentioned, your stress response, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk a lot about safety on this podcast because it's so critical, because as humans, that's what we're wired to search for. So when it comes to not having safety, when we are stressed, we're taking more sick days, right? This is the opposite of having safe environments. We're taking more sick days, we're absent. That you can do all the correlations to bottom line as a leader if you want, but we all know that these things correlate. You are not as willing to accept others' opinions, which means you may not be collaborating with others. And that's a huge missed opportunity for an organization. That means also probably a lack of innovation that's occurring, a
Correct.
lack of efficiency or continuous process improvement because these maybe teams or individuals are working in silos, right? I just want to showcase the reverse of safety, because going into an environment that you feel unsafe in not only has an impact on that organization, but that individual is now showing up in a fearful state. They're probably more likely to make more mistakes than if they had a safe environment to practice a safe risk type of decision making process. And all of these other things can impact, and at the individual level, their immune system, which obviously can bring on diseases if we wanted to go that route, right?
Yeah, it's impacting the individual at every level,
Mm,
cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, physically. And, you know, at the end of the day, organizations are an organism, right?
mm.
It's an organism, and the organ, right, is the millions of decisions and the people that are present in the organization. And so the better we can maintain their well-being and their health, then the more profitable and the more sustainable the profitability of any organization is going to be. What was an interesting thing that came out of my doctoral research is that the majority of leaders that I did my research on, so I did research on leaders, and then I also did engagement studies on their direct reports. So I measured the leadership spiritual intelligence of the leaders, and then I measured the engagement levels of their direct reports, and then I did
Mm.
interviews. And so, what was, I thought, the biggest takeaway was that the majority of leaders absolutely had 70 to 80% of what I would quantify as spiritual intelligent characteristics. They
Mm.
acknowledged them, they had them, they had no problem articulating them to me. There was many a leader that would talk to me about being purpose driven and using the same asking questions about who they are as a person so as to lead more efficiently. However, less than 50% of them willingly shared any of that with their people. And so what happens is it's not enough to know that you are yourself. If you don't share it with anybody that reports to you, then engagement doesn't shift because they don't know. And
So
so
what does
right
that look
now,
like?
there's an environment in which leaders can acknowledge personally that they might have qualities and aspects of spiritual intelligence, but they do not themselves feel safe to share it. And so if they're not sharing it, it's really kind of only benefiting them and benefiting no one else.
My goodness. So why are leaders not feeling safe to share?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. Some of the ones that came out from my research was that there is a pressure in the way we have constructed and understand leadership in our organizations from a Western perspective, that if one was to
Mm.
share such qualities and characteristics, and to say things like, I don't know. Empathy is a way that we can create more strength in our organization. So let me be vulnerable with you and tell you about a time that I needed help doing whatever, right? That is seen as a weakness. When I was in corporate,
Mm,
I was ridiculed if I shared any kind of authentic feeling in support of personal growth and development of myself or my people. My VP, my
mm,
CEOs, they would say things. It held me back from promotions because they would say stuff like, "You're not strong enough to do this because your feelings are too much into what you do." So
mm,
there's this perception that somehow a leader is better if they are unfeeling, if they are unaware. And the exact opposite is true, and research proves this. And people don't
mm.
engage. Again, I know I just keep harping on this, but it's like nobody's going to fully give of themselves if they don't feel safe with who their leader is and or the culture in which they operate. And so there's so much pressure for leaders to do the opposite of what we know to be true.
We need to reverse engineer it all,
Oh,
is what I'm
absolutely.
hearing.
And that's why I got into academia. That's why I started saying, well,
Mhm.
I'm not going to change CEOs' minds. I tried that. That consulting frame did not work. No matter how much they acknowledged it and believed it, they weren't changing who they were. So then I was like, I'm going to start dealing with emerging leaders and get them
Yes.
early on. And it's they're so much more open because they're very open to like perspectives and mindsets and theories, and they're willing to learn. And it's a much more, I have found, much more meaningful way in which I've been able to positively impact a much greater population to start embracing what is truly courageous behavior. Because courage, at the end of the day, core, the Latin root, as you know, means to speak from the heart. It doesn't mean
Mm,
to overpower someone and or to use violence and authority and title to 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 get your way. That's not being
yeah.
courageous, right? But to speak our hearts in alignment with our minds, in alignment with vision and strategy, that's courageous. And that's what people
Mm.
respond to and people want to see.
Yeah, it builds respect and credibility, and going back to what you said, trustworthiness, right? I can depend on you. I know I can rely on you. And it humanizes you and then gives me the space and invites me to be human too. I love that. So now that you're doing the incredible work of impacting emerging leaders, do you have good news to share with us? Are you seeing a shift?
Absolutely.
Good.
I see it every day in the classroom. I see it when people that have graduated, reply back to me with how they're constructing cultures within the organizations that they're working in. And so, one thing that we have to understand is that leaders aren't defined by titles, right? Leaders are defined by what
Mhm.
we do. So we can lead from the side or from the back of the room, or like we don't always have to be up front and be the authority that is speaking, with a title. And so when they understand they have that power to impact the person in the next cubicle, or or the one other person that they work with on a project, and they understand that that is also leadership, then what happens is there's a cumulative effect that begins to take place in which um, people start to value and engage at a greater level. And all of this goes back to self-awareness. And the one thing I forgot to mention is that the other part of that equation is gratitude. And so, the
Mm,
students I work with every day are truly grateful. They're grateful for the opportunities, they're grateful, but nobody ever asks them. So much of our educational system has been based on provide me with the answer I want, and then let's move forward. And mine is very much like, yes, there's information we need to get and there's technical expertise we need to know. However, none of it's going to matter if I don't understand why am I doing it, who I am, what is driving this process, and how I will implement all this expertise. So you have to be self-aware and you have to have gratitude, right? Glassdoor did a survey, and it was
mhm.
like 81% of employees said that they work harder and more willingly for a grateful boss, for somebody that shows gratitude. And we know that best of all, positive recognition is contagious. So
Contagious.
like,
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, if I'm practicing gratitude as a leader, I am expressing it to my direct reports. I'm expressing it upwards. Like, what does that look like,
at
in terms of, yeah, showing up in a gratitude way?
Yeah, it's at every opportunity, right? So it's through an email, it's through meetings,
Yeah.
it's through walking down the hallway and pausing to, say something. And it's also being great, taking gratitude for yourself. Like often what we find is that people get eager to project out and to show gratitude when they start to see the power in it, and they forget to like love themselves and show
Mm,
gratitude for who they are. And so what happens is then you get out of balance again. And so there's this self-awareness is the thing that keeps you in balance. Self-awareness is like you're doing too much, take a moment. Or self-awareness is you're spending way too much time being quiet and self-reflective. You need to go do something, right? It's what I call
mm,
active patience. So you have to be actively patient. You have to take purposeful and intentional action, but then you have to let it be so that it can take hold, so that it can do something. But if we're always doing, then nothing can ever fully maximize its potential because we're just constantly adding more information, data, actions, and nothing has time. We don't give it the space, people, or projects in which they can step into their brilliance and grow at a highest level, right? So anytime I write an email back to a student, I try to make sure that I express not only what they need to do, but why I'm grateful for who they are and what they do. My
wow.
classrooms are always started off with a 5 minutes where we go around and talk about what we've done that we are grateful for, that we're, what was positive that was going on. And it can be the dumbest thing in the world, you know what I mean? Smallest thing, insignificant to the
Mhm.
biggest. But what we're doing is we're reshaping our minds and we're reshaping the
Yeah.
perspective to start looking for the good and the opportunity and not the negative and the barriers. And that way we can
Mhm.
persist because success is based on persistence and a positive attitude. That's what drives success.
Wow. And it's so amazing, amazing, amazing to like bring that as a practice into leadership. And one of the other things that I love that you said was that you don't need a title, a leadership title to make a change to the culture that you're in. And it's really, you can do that from anywhere. So if you are listening and you don't have a title, that's, in management or leadership, don't be deterred from changing your culture or being able to feel like you can make a difference or influence it in a positive way. There's still plenty that you can do. And in fact, we need you to do it, right? We need you to do it.
Yeah, don't undervalue your worth.
Mm, mhm.
Your people are watching you and people are listening to you. And I know this just from teaching, right? So I could think, wow, nobody said anything today and it wasn't very interactive, so nobody's paying attention and nobody's listening. But I will then, 2 months later, somebody will come up to me that was a former student and be like, there was this one time when you were talking, you know what I mean? Like they listen and they observe.
Yeah.
And it's the same in organizations. I found this, right? With my people that when I had 500 people reporting to me, you know, the moments they remembered were when I was empathetic, vulnerable, and transparent and authentic. Never once did they say, it was amazing that spreadsheet you developed and that data you gave us. That really changed the way I was able to lead my people and drive performance. That never happened, right? But
Mm-mm.
remember that time you shared that experience with us when you had to overcome that issue and here's what you did? That really helped me, blah, 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 right? Like,
Yeah.
but we ignore this as leaders too often, like because like I said earlier, it is misunderstood to be a weakness as opposed to a strength. It takes courage to be who you are. It takes courage to stand in your brilliance. But we've got to give people permission to do that, and we have to create cultures in which they feel safe to do it. If not, people aren't going to be able to create shared visions or motivate their employees, or that's not going to happen. And so for me, it is just fundamentally crucial that in today's day and age that we have leaders that are willing to be self-aware and look to their heart and be in alignment with both their heart and their mind in a purposeful way.
Mm. And self-awareness helps you balance the doing and the being, as you said. And Mike, you are giving so much permission to emerging leaders and this next generation of leaders. And that makes so much sense to me. And I know so many out there who could resonate with that. And I am so excited to see the future of work. And it's because of people like you who are out there doing the work to help shape the next generation of work. So thank you so much for doing that. That's my, gratitude to you. And I have one final question
Sure.
for you, believe it or not, because we're tying up at time here. I ask this question of everyone, and that is, what is the most recent paradigm shift that you've experienced? And it can be related to this work
Mm.
or anything else.
Oh, I kind of alluded to it earlier. So nice.
Yeah.
It all ties together, which is how the world is. Everything is connected when you
Yes.
really take a moment to
Everything's
look.
connected.
A big paradigm shift for me was the realization that there is tremendous power in practicing active patience. So the
Mm,
active part is the ability to take purposeful action and then be willing to let go. It can be understood as the intentional decision to let things be while remaining present to what they can be, right? So I used to take action and then want immediate results and gratification. And if I didn't get it, then I would just take more action because I thought that was solving it. What I had to learn was to be intentional and purposeful with my action, driven by self awareness, then allow it time and space to become its fullest self. So
mm.
it's a beautiful shift that happened in my life and that I think many people can grow from. Um, that idea that when we take purposeful actions and we allow the time and the space to be, then we maximize our performance and our benefits. And it's a beautiful way to live, I found.
Well, I mean, it's such a beautiful way to think about life in general. I know I could benefit from practicing more active patience. And I think societally, we focus so much on that instant gratification and that need for like a return immediately, right, on the things that we're putting in our efforts into. So, just want to real quick ask you, when you are putting your effort in and then you're waiting and letting go, what's going through your mind? Like, what can you do to help yourself kind of sit and actively patiently wait for the
Yeah,
thing to
so
return.
one thing, and thank you so much for the question because, and I didn't make this clear. One thing is that it's not a
Mm,
passive way of being. Just We often think of patience as being passive, and that's why I'm so I don't know, so cognizant and want people to be aware of that there can be active patience. So allowing something to be does not mean then you stop doing anything.
mm,
So on one hand, like if I put an initiative forward in an organization from a strategic standpoint, I have to give it time and allow people to help work that so that it can grow and become what it needs to be. But then I also need to be self-aware enough to know that I need to check in every once in a while to see what's happening. I can't let go so completely that I am unaware, right? So this is
mm.
where that self-awareness comes back in. So if you're self-aware, you can be organizationally aware. So then you check in through your own self-awareness and you'll realize, how is that initiation coming? Does somebody need support? Do I need to remove a barrier? Or do I need to just let it be for another moment? And so it's this back and forth, and it's this fluid ability to be flexible and moldable and adaptable, but never stopping your ability to be in alignment with the ultimate goal, right? So it's always about the goal stays where it needs to be, but you can be flexible in your approach. And you do that through self awareness. So I don't know if that fully answered what you were asking, but
It did, and I just think about those who haven't practiced that as a muscle, including myself, like how to sit with it and let it be rather than trying to like action it, right? So, um, I think I kind of answered my own question. It's a you learn from the practice of actually taking too much action, maybe, and that's what you kind of learn from that aspect, from the reverse of it, right? It's like all the things that could happen if you do not let it go and let it be.
yeah, what I have found is that it is so powerful when you let things be. and you achieve so much more. And then you start to trust your own ability to allow things, because you're already brilliant
Mm.
and you already know what
Mm.
you're doing. We are just not really patient. And so,
Mm.
and so
Yeah.
that little bit of patience, that little bit, it's almost permission, right? So think of it
Yeah.
as permission. Patience becomes permission to let it be, right? And I like let it
Yeah.
be better than let it go. Let it go always was hard for me because I can't let anything
Mm.
go. It's just not who I am. But if I could let it be, meaning let it be what it needs to be, that was
Mm.
that was something I could manage, something I could wrap my head around and fully invest in. Was we took action, now let it become, right? Let it be what it needs to be. And if I have to step back in to kind of coax it and guide it and do something, that's fine. But then I step back again. And it's amazing what happens when you do that.
Wow, so magical. Thank you for sharing that perspective and that paradigm shift. And I can't wait to hear people's comments and perspectives on this episode. And thank you again for all of the impact and the legacy that you're leaving, the work you're doing, changing the future of work.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was so good seeing you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a review, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening. If you know a business leader in practice or friend who you think would be interested in this episode, please consider sharing it with them. I am so grateful for your support. For more updates, you can follow us at Paradigm Shifts Podcast on Instagram. See you on the next episode.